One of the things that we absolutely love to consume in terms of media as people in the United States of America and the world over are narratives about a fall from grace. The idea that at some point something was built up to such an extent that it was either respected or revered by all or most, only for it to be torn down later and fall from grace and be hated by the same people that helped prop it up in the first place. A great example of something like this would be the finale of HBO's hit series Game of Thrones. This show was once viewed as one of the greatest television shows of all time, a show that was once praised for avoiding cliches, having well-written dialogue, interesting and compelling characters, and quite a number of fall from grace stories within the show. However, as the show went on, the things that people liked and enjoyed about the series, the characters that people got invested in, began to invert, as did the rules of the series, and that's why the finale of Game of Thrones sticks in the minds of a lot of people in the United States of America even a full year later. It's not because it was bad, there's lots of bad TV shows, it's because at one point it was incredibly good. And just as the same people who once loved and embraced Game of Thrones were among the biggest critics of the way that the series ended up churning out, the same is happening for YouTuber Ethan Klein, who is better known as H3H3 Productions. Now, at one point in time, Ethan Klein of H3H3 Productions was viewed in very good standing by the overwhelming majority of the YouTube community. This was when he was making individual videos on his original H3 channel, where he called out the bad actors on this platform, specifically the pranksters and people who would scam their audience, usually young, through their YouTube channel. However, over time, Ethan's profile actually raised far beyond somebody who was well liked in the community when he was sued by one of the people that he made a call out video on. Because rather than pay a settlement or walk away or cry about it, Ethan decided that he was going to fight this lawsuit in order to get some precedent on the board for everyone in the YouTube community to look back on and be able to use if they were sued and essentially extorted going forward. Remember, if Ethan would have lost this lawsuit, then nearly every video on his YouTube channel would have also been vulnerable to lawsuits by people that he made videos lampooning that also might have been just as angry as Matt Hoss was and might have been looking for their own pound of flesh. It was actually in Ethan's best interest at this moment to settle for the small amount of money that Matt Hoss was demanding. However, Ethan thought if he settled, then he would lead to other YouTubers thinking that they have to settle, and that's why he decided that he was going to fight this. And you could tell that this decision is what Ethan wants to be remembered for, because he specifically said it in a recent video that this is what he wants to be remembered for.
Our case was even published as case law, the only such example on the books in defense of commentary on YouTube. You can even go to copyright.gov and see it published there. I would hope that this would be my legacy here on YouTube. But people are hell-bent on making even this a case for how evil I am.
Now, as we all know, Ethan ended up winning the lawsuit, and the combination of him deciding to fight this lawsuit and winning it and setting a precedent that could be used and cited later by other YouTubers on this platform moved Ethan from a really good standing in this community to having basically golden credibility going forward. And this, of course, would be the prelude for Ethan's fall, because once you have golden credibility, once you're in a class of your own, that's when you're primed to fail, because you can only really go down after that. And this is also when Ethan decided to move more towards the podcast. And the podcast, this long-form conversation that is nowhere near as interesting as Ethan's original videos, is the perfect medium for people who want to dig up dirt on Ethan in order to tear him down and build themselves up. Now look, I'm about to give you the most basic YouTuber opinion of all time as it relates to H3H3, but this opinion is in fact true, and the reason it's so basic, and the reason it's basically common sense, is because it's something that the majority of people agree on. I really enjoyed H3H3's original reaction videos, the thing that made him famous. I do not enjoy his podcast. I don't think he's good in long form. I think the fact that he had such golden credibility at the time he started the podcast funneled enough of people from his audience over to the podcast so he doesn't have to improve the podcast. And in reality, we all know to a certain extent that the reason that Ethan moved from reaction videos, which could get demonetized and might take a week, maybe more to make, to the podcast is because the podcast is way more financially lucrative for Ethan than anything. Just look at the recent news of Joe Rogan signing a $100 million deal for a licensing agreement with Spotify. You don't offer somebody $100 million for a podcast if having a successful podcast isn't an insane money generator. Now, I know that might be considered an unfair comparison because Joe Rogan has the biggest podcast of all time, and obviously Ethan Klein's podcast is not worth $100 million. But compare Ethan Klein's podcast to another very popular podcast that's not the biggest, from Barstool Sports, the Call Her Daddy's podcast, which according to the Barstool Sports creators, or the owners of Barstool Sports, not doing the show cost them $100,000 per episode not done. Obviously, successful podcasts are giant money makers in a way that YouTube videos are not. Now, no one knows this is true more than the people who actually make videos on YouTube. So when you have Ethan claiming that the reason he's not making videos on his main channel is due to the fact that he has anxiety that's preventing him from doing anything, and he is shooting podcasts over and over and over again, the people on YouTube are going to get a little suspicious, and they're going to think that there's actually a financial motivation behind this, that Ethan is hiding under the guise of his anxiety in order to get people not to be angry at him for obviously doing something that is way more financially viable than his videos. Now, to be clear, I'm not criticizing Ethan Klein for doing something that is more financially viable than what he was currently doing. It makes all the sense in the world when you understand what the value of individual YouTube videos are for what the value of a podcast is, for him to move in that direction. And it actually shows a lot of brand strength that he was able to pull over so much of his original audience to the podcast when the podcast is far inferior in terms of content. However, he's lying about it, and he's consistently lying about it, and we all as creators know that he's lying about it, so of course that's going to lead people, and especially people who already didn't like Ethan, to make a ton of response videos. And when we know Ethan is driven by financial motivation, which everybody's driven by financial motivation, like I don't sell t-shirts, have a Patreon, have donation links in the description box of this video because I think it's funny. Like, that is for a financial gain. Like, everybody does things for financial gain. These videos are monetized. Like, again, I'm not criticizing him for that. That's going to lead people to make criticisms and start conspiracy theories about what other things that they perceive Ethan is doing shadily for financial gain. And this is where the Fupa stuff comes in. Now, the Fupa Fund was supposed to be a fund for YouTube creators to tap into if they ever found themselves in the same situation or similar situation as Ethan Klein, where they're facing a frivolous lawsuit in order to shut them down when what they're doing is clearly fair use. Now, Ethan set up this fund, or he promised the setting up of this fund when he first got engaged in the lawsuit with Matt Haas, and it was the fund based on what Philip DeFranco had raised for Ethan. However, even though Ethan set up this fund for that, and he always intended for him to be the first client of that fund, it became apparent and clear during the course of the lawsuit that Ethan's lawsuit was going to cost way more than he estimated. So now that the lawsuit is over and the Fupa Fund is basically dried up, this leads a lot of people, in combination with the financial thing I was talking about earlier, to theorize that Ethan, in some way, shape, or form, stole money for the Fupa Fund. And they make the argument that a lot of the luxury that Ethan lives in is due to the fact that he stole this fund. This is completely ridiculous. This is absurd. This is basically the idiot test on YouTube if you want to criticize Ethan Klein. Now, as I established earlier in this video, the idea that Ethan's podcast doesn't generate enough money for him to cover his own lifestyle is patently absurd. That podcast makes more than enough money for him to have the fancy house and everything that you can possibly think of, and then some. I'm sure Ethan has a lot of money tucked away that he's not outwardly spending. And his videos generated enough revenue prior to and during the lawsuit to cover everything that he would possibly need in order to start the podcast and have himself set up with the home studio. So Ethan had no reason to steal money from the Fupa Fund, and I'm not even sure if Ethan was even able to steal from the Fupa Fund, because remember, it was set up by Philip DeFranco, and Philip DeFranco might have been the person of trust in charge of that fund. So if Ethan would have stole money from this fund, Philip DeFranco's name might have been on the line for potential fraud charges or potential embezzlement charges, depending on how California law works in regards to these matters. So the Fupa Fund allegations never made any sense on any level. It would have been insanely illegal for Ethan to take that money and use it for personal gain, and it would have also likely brought in legal trouble for Philip DeFranco, who again created the fund that ended up becoming the Fupa Fund and directed people to donate to that fund. Now, obviously, all this criticism of Ethan that's been building up ever since the Matt Haas lawsuit has been getting to Ethan. It's something that really is starting to bother him, and that's been bothering him for multiple reasons. Obviously, the lies and the insane lies are going to be annoying to Ethan Klein. But what also gets to him are the criticisms that are stinging with truth, like what I said about the podcast, why he actually stopped making videos on his main channel and moved towards the podcast, because this is something that, despite being abundantly obvious to anybody who looks at it objectively, Ethan refuses to acknowledge. So Ethan has decided to do response videos to people making criticisms of him. And after the success of the first response video, which was received rather well by the broader YouTube community, Ethan decided it would be a good idea to make his second response video to Keemstar himself, the host of Drama Alert. And Keemstar seems like he would be an easy target. This is the guy that iDubbbz did one of his famous content cops on that was so stinging and devastating that Keemstar actually publicly acknowledged some of his faults after the video's release. However, even though Keemstar is an easy target for a creator that wants to make response videos, because there's so much stuff that this guy has done in his past that you can use against him, and he has such a bad attitude, and he's already perceived to be like a trashy version of TMZ for YouTube, Ethan completely missed the mark because he spent so little time addressing the actual things between him and Keemstar, and instead just kept trying to drag Keemstar through the mud with anything that he could possibly use, no matter how low he had to go. And this came to a head when Ethan decided to blame Keemstar, or imply that it was Keemstar's fault that Etika, another YouTuber who I had never heard of, took his own life.
Of course, hypothetical, but it is quite a coincidence when you consider that only 51 days later, that very same YouTuber jumped off a bridge to his death.
Now, this is just a dirty and disgusting low blow by Ethan, and I'm not going to go into whether or not Keemstar and this creator were in fact friends when this creator was still with us, because honestly, I find the concept of YouTube creators being really close friends complete and utter nonsense. But what I will point out is that this creator's family has already released statements asking people not to level the blame at Keemstar. But Ethan doesn't care because he's trying to throw Keem under the bus, so he keeps tying this person's death, however loosely humanly possible you can do that, back to Keemstar in order to smear him and essentially guilt him for the death of this creator. This creator who had serious mental health issues that Keemstar did not take very seriously, but in no way, shape, or form did that make Keemstar responsible for what happened to him. Now, as if that wasn't bad enough, as if that wasn't hypocritical enough, that Ethan would go after Keemstar for supposedly exploiting the mental illness of another YouTube creator, while he is simultaneously exploiting the mental illness and death of that same creator to go after Keemstar, Ethan also angered a lot of people with this video when he decided it would be acceptable to employ Media Matters-like tactics and go after Keemstar's sponsorship with G Fuel and his monetization overall.
How is G Fuel still sponsor this guy, by the way? Chug it, G Fuel! Was able to get this kid on his show, fully monetized. Keemstar cashed in big time on this whole ordeal. And I also, if I recall correctly, the interview brought to you by the SWAT murder was also sponsored by G Fuel. Use code KEEM for 10% off of your life expectancy. Sponsored by G Fuel.
Really, Ethan? First of all, let me just make this clear. Keemstar has stated multiple times that he is in a financial position where he never has to work another day in his life. But it's the principle of this line of attack that really starts to bother me, because as YouTubers, we have faced a number of adpocalypses and a number of media hit pieces with out-of-context stuff in order to hurt the creators, not only their image, but hurt them financially by pressuring brands to pull away from those creators. Now, to see Ethan, who once had golden credibility amongst the community for standing up for all creators in a fair use battle, a guy who defended PewDiePie against this very line of attack from the Wall Street Journal when they got him fired with out-of-context clips, from his network, which was owned by Disney at the time, now turn around and adopt those same mainstream media tactics to bully YouTubers into silence just to settle a feud with Keemstar is completely absurd. Now, to be clear, Ethan did not just go after G Fuel during the course of this video. If you watch it carefully, there's at least one mention of a video that Keemstar put out that Ethan didn't like, that he was angry that it was monetized.
Was able to get this kid on his show, fully monetized, fully monetized, fully monetized.
We don't need another adpocalypse on YouTube, and we especially don't need one because of two creators having a little bit of a tiff that are both financially secure enough to weather an adpocalypse. I don't know about you, but I'm living in a situation where there's a pandemic, and I'm very worried about the security of my income. So Ethan, if you want to have your pissing contest with Keemstar, that's totally fine. You're both in the dirt, enjoy getting mud all over each other. But don't drag other people on the platform down by embracing these media matters like tactics that are not only meant to target sponsors, but meant to target the monetization system overall. Because creators like me, who can't afford sponsors, who don't have that much support from their audience, I'm grateful for the support that I have, need to rely on the monetization dollars in order to pay my bills. So yeah, congratulations, Ethan. At one point, you were viewed as a creator with golden credibility, the large creator on this platform that stuck up for the little guy, and now you're viewed as the creator who cuts the dead weight below you so you can make it up the mountain. I mean, seriously, Ethan, somehow you managed to come out of this looking significantly worse than Keemstar. Keemstar. Anyway, those are my thoughts on this. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. As always, if you like this video, then please show me by leaving a like. You can subscribe for more content. Follow me on all the social medias. You can support me with the support links down in the description box below until Ethan flags them because he disagrees with me on something. This is me talking about the rise and fall of Ethan and not the rise again because he did not rise again. Till next time.